I'm sure by now most of you have heard the news that Dead by Daylight has lost the license to Halloween, and as a result, Michael Myers and Laurie Strode will still be playable, but no longer purchasable. But Haddonfield, their associated map, will not be playable anymore. As you'd expect, quite a few people in the community are up in arms about this loss, furious at Behaviour for losing such a hugely important license and claiming that the death of DBD is surely soon to follow. And I totally get why people would come to that conclusion. After all, DBD owes a huge portion of its early success to the Halloween license, but I don't think Behaviour are to blame for the license leaving. In case you haven't seen, there is an entire official Halloween game that's due to release this year, and there's a pretty good chance that the license holders have pulled it from DBD to make Myers more exclusive to their game. Sort of a, hey, if you want your dose of Myers, then you've got to come play our game, not DBD. I'm pretty sure that's the same reason we lost Pinhead too, so this isn't the first time we've seen this happen. It likely won't be too long after the Halloween game's release when we see the license return to DBD. But there's one thing about this license that people might not miss so much, and that is none other than Haddonfield, a map that has been so incredibly troublesome, despite how incredibly iconic it is. Nearly as iconic as this segue to today's sponsor, Red Magic, bringing us the follow-up to their industry-shaking Red Magic 11 Pro with the all-new Red Magic 11 Air. Red Magic's Air series focuses on taking the sheer power and performance that you've come to know and love from their other devices and managing to fit it into sleek, elegant, and lightweight form factors while sacrificing the smallest amount of performance possible, and the Red Magic 11 Air is no exception. The backside is thoughtfully crafted to look elegant and classy, with a tastefully subtle hint of techie gamer undertones, with the details somewhat resembling trace lines. The device is both thinner and lighter, plus the edges of the device are much more rounded for an incredibly comfortable grip. But the beauty doesn't stop there, as on the front it's packing a gorgeous 1.5K resolution display at a buttery smooth 144Hz refresh rate. And of course, it's equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Elite to back it up, so you can actually hit those high frame rates. Of course, it's Red Magic we're dealing with here, so there's still more dubs in store. It's no secret that packing such powerful hardware into such thin and lightweight devices can be a nightmare for both heat and battery life. Yet they have you covered there too, with active cooling from the Red Magic Turbo fan that you've come to know and love, paired with graphene to spread the heat out and prevent hot spots. And all of this comes topped off with a whopping 7,000 mAh battery. Yeah, like I said, they've covered absolutely every base here. Also making a return is Mora, your own personal assistant that can coach you in game and just have a chat, as well as Game Space, a suite of various plugins designed to enhance your gaming experience with image upscaling, footstep audio amplification, and tons more. Check out the Red Magic 11 Air now using the link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you so much to Red Magic for sponsoring this video. Haddonfield's story begins on the 25th of October 2016 with the release of the Halloween DLC, alongside Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, and all of their respective perks. Of course, it's no secret that this was easily Dead by Daylight's most important DLC ever, as before this, DBD was basically a niche indie game with a very small player base. Before, if you asked somebody if they knew Dead by Daylight, they'd respond with, "What?" But now, their response would be, "Oh, that's the game with Michael Myers in it, right?" In other words, it propelled Dead by Daylight into the public eye and earned Behaviour plenty of money, securing Dead by Daylight's continued development and opened the door to all of the collabs you know and love. If it wasn't for the Halloween license holders taking a chance on this relatively unknown indie game, Dead by Daylight would have 100% fizzled out and been abandoned by the end of 2017. The game we know and love simply wouldn't be here today. Now, there was a lot of absolutely insane stuff that came from this DLC, like original Decisive Strike, which genuinely might have been the most overpowered perk in PvP gaming history, and I've already made videos covering those topics, so if you haven't seen them, definitely take a look. But today's topic, Haddonfield, is slightly different to all of those topics for one major reason. All of those other things were fixed and dealt with a long time ago. I never thought I'd see the day, but we now live in a world where Decisive Strike has been fair for a longer amount of time than it was overpowered for. It took an almighty 4 years and 5 months for them to stop Decisive Strike from terrorizing killers by turning it into an anti-tunnel perk instead of just a flat-out extra life, whereas at the time of releasing this video, that change happened 4 years and 10 months ago. But Haddonfield has still been continuing to cause problems this entire time, and it's been more than just your typical too many pallets that we've seen with other maps. Since this DLC came out so early in DBD's lifespan, players weren't as well trained as they are now to immediately spot overpowered setups, but our first issue is one that didn't need an expert to spot. In fact, brand new and long-time players alike noticed it very quickly. The not-so-great fences of Haddonfield. While the map looked absolutely beautiful and was actually a pretty faithful portrayal of Haddonfield, it was pretty hard not to notice the 10-mile-long wooden picket fences lining the outskirts of the map and in between most of the houses. And considering that the map took place in a street with tons of houses, the fences weren't exactly hard to come by. Now, from an accuracy standpoint, it makes perfect sense, right? Fences are there to separate the land, and it's nothing unusual to only have one opening in the front and one in the back. But from a gameplay perspective, this was absolutely horrendous. If a killer was patrolling the map and stumbled across a survivor on the opposite side of one of these fences, they couldn't just begin a chase like any other map. Instead, they'd have to walk all the way around to the gap in order to even cross the fence. Meanwhile, since the fence is short and everyone can see straight over them, the survivor would see exactly which side the killer is going to, and so the survivor would simply run the opposite way around said fence. This would create very long chases with zero skill or game sense required from the survivor and zero opportunity for counterplay from the killer. Plus, since this wasn't even anything to do with pallets, it's not even like this was a resource that could run out. Sometimes these fences would also have a vault placed right in the middle, which made things even worse. This is because back then, killers vaulted way slower than they do nowadays, so if the killer tried to vault it, they'd actually end up losing distance. Plus, there was no bamboozle or any other vault speed perk, so these windows literally only benefited the survivors, as once the killer started to catch up, they could vault to reset the distance. But it doesn't stop there, as on top of all of that, there was also a bug that would sometimes cause bushes to spawn in between these gaps, completely blocking off some of the gaps entirely. Matter of fact, it was completely possible for no gaps to spawn whatsoever, as it wasn't until 2 years after the map was released where they made it that the short fences had to spawn with gaps, while also clarifying that the tall fences could still spawn with no gaps at all. And to top it all off, for the first 6 months of this map's existence, Bloodlust hadn't been added to the game yet. So yeah, these fences could get very obnoxious very quickly. With this being a very obvious issue to players of all skill levels, surely this means the devs would have been quick to address it, right? Nope. I can say from experience that these fences were an issue that the devs were still tackling shortly before the map was completely remade an almighty 5 years and 6 months later on the 27th of April 2022 in patch 5.7.0. But while the never-ending fences were very annoying and often just extended chases for free, there were even more issues plaguing Haddonfield, such as God Mode glitch spots. By equipping Deadard, getting injured and then heading to the top of the balconies on some of the side houses, survivors could then utilise the dash that old Deadard used to have to go flying off the edge of the balcony onto the roof of one of the smaller huts next to it. There were 2 different versions that I can remember. The first one where the roof was mostly blocked off with an invisible barrier, but it didn't quite reach the edge of the roof, so it left a little lip or edge that the survivor could just chill on top of. Since the survivor would be so high up, they'd be completely unkillable to all killers other than the Huntress, but they were also really easy to spot, and since they were only a few meters away from the balcony, it made it pretty obvious how they got there, since killers could just go up to the balcony and lunge off in order to hit them. However, there was another one where the roof wasn't blocked off at all. In fact, it had no collision whatsoever, so when the survivor dashed onto it, they'd fall straight through onto a car parked inside. This also rendered them unkillable to everyone other than Huntress, but it was also much more hidden, and much less apparent as to how they got there if the killer did manage to find them. Think about it. If you went inside this garage and saw a survivor on top of the car, the question you'd ask is, how did they get up there? Not, how did they get down there? You wouldn't think to leave that building entirely, head on over to the next one, leap off the balcony and clip through what looks like a perfectly solid roof, unless you were somebody in the know who actually knew about the glitch ahead of time. Thankfully, these glitch spots were fixed early on in Haddonfield's lifespan, but the biggest issues, the problems that made Haddonfield so infamous, would not be fixed so quickly. And of course, I'm talking about infinite loops. I'm sure most of you have already heard tales about Haddonfield's Infinites. It's the most famous map in regards to Infinites. So much so that if someone mentions Haddonfield, it's only a matter of time until Infinites are brought up, and vice versa. If somebody brings up Infinites, it's only a matter of time until Haddonfield gets brought up, and for good reason. While Haddonfield was far from the only map with infinite loops, nor was it the map with the last infinite to be fixed, it became synonymous with infinite loops due to the sheer amount of them available on that map for survivors to take their pick. In practically every other map that had an infinite, it was just that, an infinite. One single infinite loop in one specific spot of the map, so if survivors wanted to abuse it, they at least had to get to it. Haddonfield, however, had plenty of different infinite loops to choose from. Whether it was from mixing balanced landing with any of the open side houses' top floors, often having a window to the front balcony and another to the back balcony, or, of course, the most famous of all infinite loops, the Strode House Balanced Landing Infinite. Now, for those of you who didn't live through the horrors of old school balanced landing infinite loops, let me explain just how ridiculous these loops were. I've noticed a few newer players lately talking about infinite loops and saying how it just referred to loops that were really long. Let me clarify that no, when we say infinite, we mean literally infinite, as in, it was physically impossible for a killer to ever catch up to the survivor if they played the loop correctly, even if they sat in the match for hours and nobody did gens. Of course, there would be the obvious exclusions like Trapper Trap shutting it down or a nurse just blinking to you, but for almost every other killer, it was genuinely impossible to ever kill a survivor in an infinite loop. Even the Hillbilly was susceptible to it, and as you might have gathered from its reputation, these infinites remained in the map for literal years. In fact, the map was still plagued with infinites up until the point where the root cause of many infinites on many maps was addressed. 3 years after Haddonfield was added into the game, on the 3rd of December 2019, in patch 3.4.0, the same day the Oni was released, the following change would go live. Balanced landing. Nerf. No longer reduces stumble while exhausted. To my knowledge, balanced landing was the cause of most infinite loops due to DBD's map generation system not properly being able to take verticality into account when checking the spawn rules for tiles, structures and resources. So oftentimes there'd be really strong windows placed near a drop, which would be totally fine in normal gameplay due to the stumble causing survivors to lose lots of distance. But once you add balanced landing's 75% reduced stumble into the mix, that's when the loop would become infinite. But even with infinites fixed, Haddonfield still remained as an incredibly survivor-sided map due to the never-ending fences with incredibly strong vaults in the middle of them, loops absolutely everywhere, and the original House of Pain, which had perfect window lineups and multiple pallets, which was guaranteed to waste tons of the killer's time. And to most people's knowledge, that is the extent of original Haddonfield's issues. And in terms of documented issues, it pretty much is. But of course, I was in the trenches back in the day, and just like the undocumented hag buff, I've got some of my own special sauce for you guys here too. There was another issue Haddonfield had, not one of balance or bugs, but that of piracy. It wasn't the players pirating the game or anything like that, but instead, the DBD devs were doing the pirating. You ever see those stock image memes? The ones with people doing generic poses with watermarks plastered all over it? Those watermarks are intentionally placed everywhere to ruin the image while still serving as a demo or preview of what you would be getting if you paid for it. And it turns out, texture designers also do the exact same thing for developers too. They provide demo versions of their textures covered in watermarks for game designers to test in their projects to see if it fits their desired art style before they purchase them and then swap them out for the paid for, non-watermarked versions. I'm sure you can figure out where I'm going with this. On the original version of Haddonfield, there were unlicensed textures, complete with watermarks used in the map. Where, you may ask? Perhaps a random corner of the map on a tiny object or something like that? Nope. This unlicensed texture was used on the main building. Yes, Myers' very own house, the Strode House, had this unlicensed texture and watermark plastered all over it. If we head inside, up the stairs and onto the balcony, we can see right here a watermark for dreamstime.com where this texture came from. And it's not just this one spot either, as the watermarks are on the wooden board texture that covers the entire exterior of the building. So we can head to just about any spot around the outside of the building, and sure enough, you'll find the watermarks. Now, to be fair, it is pretty common for developers to use unpaid versions of textures while developing the project, and simply pay for the textures once they're 100% certain they want these ones, then swap out the unlicensed version for the paid version. And it's not entirely unheard of for some of them to be missed when they were swapping them over. So it can be forgiven for this unlicensed texture to make it through to the map's final release for a few months before they noticed and swapped it out, right? One slight issue. This texture wasn't only there for a few brief months. No, instead it was there for over half a decade. It was present on the map from the day it was released and seemingly stayed there until the day the map was reworked. If they did pay for the textures, it seems weird to use the unlicensed version for 5 entire years. The watermark is present in all of the old versions of DBD that I have archived, and there isn't a single mention of this being changed in any of the patch notes. There's a very small chance they removed it very late in the map's lifespan, but if they did, they kept quiet about it. Things needed to change. But of course, eventually, the original Haddonfield's reign of terror would finally come to an end after 5.5 years, on the 28th of April 2022 in patch 5.7.0, where the map would be completely reworked and given a graphical overhaul. The new version of the map would be significantly smaller than the original, the never-ending fences were no more, both the pallet and window count was significantly reduced, and the House of Pain was now replaced with the House of Mild Inconvenience. The new map was nowhere near as faithful to the source material as the original, but at the end of the day, DBD is a game, not a movie yet, and the old version simply caused problem after problem, so some accuracy had to be lost in the name of gameplay. But with that being said, our problems were not over yet. While the devs did finally manage to address just how incredibly survivor-sided Haddonfield was, they might have addressed it a bit too heavy-handedly, as the map now had the complete opposite problem, now being incredibly killer-sided. While it didn't come as a surprise that the number of strong windows would be seriously reduced, it was surprising that they would also pair that with an absurdly low pallet count, one of the lowest we've ever seen. Also, in a layout that left huge dead zones around the map, it was so intense that pretty much everyone agreed that Haddonfield was now the most killer-sided map in the game by far. And it would remain that way for 3 years and 4 months, until the 23rd of September 2025 in patch 9.2.0, where Haddonfield and a few other maps would have a change to its resource density, allowing for more resources to spawn with the intention of removing dead zones. Once again, behaviour did indeed address the issue. The map was no longer killer-sided, but also once again, their approach was too heavy-handed, and it now seemed like every single possible pallet would spawn every match without fail. While it did remove the dead zones, it also made the entirety of Haddonfield far too safe, and the other maps affected by the pallet density change were having similar issues. It had once again become an incredibly survivor-sided map. It was only 2 months later in patch 9.3.0 on the 25th of November 2025 when the pallet density changes would be adjusted again. Now, affected maps would have their pallet count reduced again, and many of them were turned into incredibly unsafe loops, once again making Haddonfield incredibly killer-sided, so things were still not right. 2 weeks later, 9.3.2 dropped, once again revising the pallet density changes. More pallets and safer pallets would spawn than in the previous patch, but still less than the first round of pallet density changes. This version was much fairer, without being so overwhelmingly survivor or killer-sided, which is a huge improvement. Was it completely perfect? Well, the community would need a bit more time to make their decision. However, we didn't have time, as just over a month later, on the 19th of January 2026, DBD would lose the entire Halloween license, leaving Laurie and Myers playable but not buyable, and outright removing Haddonfield altogether. While it is a huge blow, like I said at the start of the video, I doubt it's behaviour's fault that the license was lost, and I imagine it will return after the official Halloween game has had its launch window sales.